Steven Seagal was just walking alone, no security, no noise, no drama. It was an ordinary day, the kind where nothing feels wrong. People passed by without noticing him. Cars moved. The city breathed like it always does. He looked like any other man going about his business. Calm, quiet, unbothered. Then two men stepped into his path. They didn't shout. They didn't run. They didn't look angry. They simply stopped him, and in that moment something changed. Not in the street. Not in the crowd. In his eyes. His face stayed calm. His body stayed still. But his eyes shifted. Not with fear, not with surprise, with awareness. The kind of awareness that only comes from experience. The kind that says, I've seen this before. The air felt different. Even if no one else noticed it, something had changed. The noise of the street faded into the background. The moment slowed. Every step, every breath, every movement mattered. The two men thought they were in control. They thought they had chosen the right target. A man alone. No bodyguards. No protection. They were wrong. Steven didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't reach for anything. He simply stood there grounded, calm, unshaken. His presence alone shifted the balance. Not with aggression. Not with violence, with certainty. And in that silence, something powerful happened. The kind of moment where everything hangs in the air. The kind where time feels heavier. The kind where one decision can change everything. No one around them understood what was unfolding. To them, it looked like nothing. Just three men standing on a street. But beneath the surface, something much deeper was happening. This wasn't about strength. This wasn't about feigning. This wasn't about fighting. This was about control. This was about awareness. This was about knowing exactly who you are and who you are not. The men didn't realize it yet. But the moment they stepped in front of him, they stepped into something they weren't prepared for. And what happened next stopped everyone cold. Not because of violence, not because of chaos, but because of what real power looks like when it doesn't need to prove itself. Have you ever felt danger before it even happened? It was a normal street in daylight. People passed by. Cars moved. Life felt ordinary. The kind of place where nothing ever seems wrong. Sidewalks filled with footsteps, shops buzzing, conversations blending into background noise. To everyone else, it was just another moment in another day. No one noticed the tension building, except Steven. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. He simply stopped. Not because he was confused. Not because he was afraid. But because something inside him recognized a shift. Sometimes danger doesn't announce itself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't run at you. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it stands quietly in front of you and waits to see how you respond. Steven felt it before he saw it. His body stayed relaxed, but his awareness sharpened. His breathing slowed. His posture changed just enough to show readiness, not aggression. He didn't look around for help. He didn't look for an escape. He didn't look for a fight. He stood exactly where he was. Around him the world kept moving. A woman walked past on her phone. A car horn sounded in the distance. A child laughed somewhere nearby. Life continued as if nothing unusual was happening. But Steven's world had narrowed. Not to fear, to focus. He watched everything without making it obvious. The way the men stood. The distance between them. The angle of their bodies. The energy in their movements. These weren't random positions. These weren't accidental stops. This was a setup still. He didn't react. Because real power isn't loud. Real power isn't rushed. Real power doesn't need to show itself. He stayed calm because calm keeps control. Panic gives it away. And in that stillness, something powerful happened. The situation no longer belonged to them. It belonged to him. Not because he threatened. Not because he moved, but because he didn't. Most people would have looked away. Most people would have stepped back. Most people would have tried to escape or argue or freeze. Steven did none of those things. The silence felt louder. Sometimes power isn't about what you do. It's about what you don't do. It's about staying steady when others expect you to break. It's about seeing what others miss. It's about sensing danger before it becomes obvious. And in that moment, Steven had already taken control of the situation without touching a single person. Would you notice danger before others? They tried to look tough. Hands in pockets. To most people, they would have looked dangerous. The kind of men you avoid. The kind you don't make eye contact with. The kind you hope walk past you and never turn around. But Steven saw something different. He didn't see anger. He didn't see hatred. He didn't see rage. He saw fear. Not the kind that runs. The kind that hides. The kind that pretends to be strength. The kind that wears confidence like a mask. Their hands weren't in their pockets because Steven didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten them. He didn't show fear. He stood still, breathing slow, eyes calm. Not because he was weak, but because he was in control. Most people think strength looks loud. They think it looks like shouting. They think it looks like fists clenched, shoulders tight, voices raised. They think power needs to announce itself before it acts. But real strength doesn't behave that way. Real strength stays quiet. Steven understood something many people never learn. When emotions rise, control drops. When anger takes over, awareness fades. When fear leads, mistakes follow. So he did the opposite. He stayed calm. He stayed grounded. He stayed present. He didn't move because he didn't need to. He didn't speak because silence already said enough. His calm wasn't passive. It was active. It was intentional. It was chosen. Every breath he took was slow and steady. Not because he was trying to look calm. The men expected something different. They expected fear. They expected anger. They expected resistance or submission. They did not expect stillness. You can't control them. You can't manipulate them. You can't scare them. And that changes everything. Steven wasn't preparing to attack. He wasn't preparing to run. He wasn't preparing to argue. He was preparing to respond. There is a difference. Reaction is emotional. Response is controlled. Reaction is fast. Response is intentional. Reaction is driven by fear or anger. Response is driven by clarity. Steven chose response. He observed. He listened. He felt the energy of the moment. He read their posture, their breathing, their distance, their timing. Not with judgment, with awareness. Because awareness is power. He didn't see enemies. He didn't see threats. He saw people standing at a crossroads. People who had made bad choices. People who were trying to look strong. People who were carrying fear behind confidence. And instead of feeding that fear, he starved it. Not with violence, not with threats, but with calm. His presence alone sent a message that didn't need words, a message that said, "You don't control this moment, I do." A message that said, "I'm not afraid of you." A message that said, "This ends peacefully." And that message was louder than any shout. Real strength is quiet. Loud people often hide fear. We all face moments where our emotions want to take over. Moments where anger feels justified. Moments where fear feels natural. Moments where reacting feels easier than responding. But control isn't about denying emotion. It's about choosing what to do with it. Steven didn't ignore what he felt. He mastered it. And in doing so, he changed the entire situation without lifting a hand. Do you believe calm is more powerful than anger? The street was quiet enough to hear the tension building. Not a loud noise. Not a shout. Not a sudden movement. Just the subtle shift in energy that only someone paying attention could feel. The men noticed something was wrong. Not with him. With themselves. At first, they thought they were in control. They thought they had chosen the right target. A man walking alone, no bodyguards, no security. A man who seemed ordinary. Someone who could be intimidated. Someone who could be scared they were wrong. Steven's posture didn't change. He didn't lean back. He didn't clench his fists. He didn't flinch. Every movement he made, or rather didn't make, was deliberate. Every second he held his position sent a message they didn't expect: calm, measured, unshakable confidence. His eyes didn't blink nervously. They didn't dart around looking for help. They didn't scan for escape routes. They simply observed patiently, quietly, with a kind of precision that made it clear he was seeing everything, every detail, every intent, every hesitation. And in that moment, the men felt it. That creeping, a gnawing realization that had no sound but screamed inside their minds, "We've made a mistake." The first sign was subtle. A shift in their stance. A foot moved slightly backward. A hand tightened around nothing. A small, almost imperceptible step away from the path they had tried to block. They looked at each other, trying to read the other's face for courage, for reassurance, for some shared bravado, but there was none. Only the growing awareness that they had picked the wrong man. They had expected fear. They had expected resistance. They had expected something loud and immediate, something they could manipulate, something they could overpower. They didn't expect stillness. They didn't expect calm. They didn't expect power that didn't need to shout. And suddenly they realized they had stepped into a situation they were not equipped to handle. They had underestimated someone who had seen danger before it even arrived. They had chosen a man whose confidence was rooted in experience, in awareness and control, not in ego, not in anger, not in the need to prove himself. The realization hit them in waves, small at first, then stronger. Panic didn't come immediately. Confusion came first, then doubt, then fear, and fear without control is chaos. And in chaos, people make mistakes. One of the men glanced at Steven, trying to gauge if he would move, if he would react, if he would lash out. But Steven didn't react, not yet. And that was worse. That calm, that patience, that control, it was like a mirror reflecting back every insecurity, every weakness, every false assumption they had carried into this encounter. The men wanted to leave, but pride rooted them in place for a second longer than they should have been. They wanted to test him, to push him, to see if he was bluffing. But every second they hesitated, the certainty in Steven's presence grew. Because confidence, real confidence, doesn't need to prove itself. And then it became clear. They had picked the wrong man. Every instinct screamed it. Every hesitation confirmed it. Every breath told them, back off or regret it. In that pause, the street seemed to hold its breath. Life carried on around them, unaware of the silent storm unfolding. But for those three men, time had slowed. The realization hit deep and fast. The mistake was theirs, and in that instant, they felt it, the first twinge of regret, sharp and unavoidable. Have you ever instantly regretted a decision? Can you remember that gut feeling when you realized you had misjudged someone or something? The tension hung heavy in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. Every passerby walked by unaware, oblivious to the drama unfolding just steps away. The street seemed ordinary, the sunlight bright, the city humming its usual rhythm. But in that small stretch of pavement, time had slowed. Steven Seagal stood perfectly still, calm as a lake untouched by wind. His eyes, steady and unflinching, held the weight of experience, wisdom, and awareness. The two men in front of him shifted nervously. Their confidence, once sharp and brash, had melted into hesitation. They had underestimated him, and now they were realizing it. Every subtle movement they made betrayed their doubt, hands twitching, eyes flickering, feet shifting as if trying to find an escape that wasn't there. Then Steven spoke, not loudly, not with anger, not with a threat. Just softly, calmly, deliberately. You don't want this. 3 words, that was all. But in that simplicity lay undeniable power. The words didn't just reach their ears. They pierced the bubble of bravado they had wrapped themselves in. In an instant, they felt the weight of the situation, the gravity of their poor decision, and the realization of just how outmatched they were. They had stepped into a storm without knowing it. And Steven's calm, his deliberate choice of words, was the first lightning strike they could not ignore. There was no violence, no fists, no physical intimidation, no chase, no chaos, just silence. And yet the silence was louder than any scream. The two men froze. Their lungs tightened, their adrenaline surged, and their minds raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Their entire strategy had been dismantled by 3 simple words spoken by a man who didn't need to prove anything. It was the kind of moment that stays with you. The kind that imprints itself on memory, because it wasn't force that changed the situation. It was clarity. It wasn't aggression that stopped them. It was controlled presence. It wasn't power that needed to shout. It was wisdom that only needed to speak once. Steven's calmness, combined with the sharpness of his awareness, created a force invisible yet undeniable. The street itself seemed to lean in closer, as if holding its breath. The men realized they weren't dealing with someone ordinary. They weren't dealing with someone reckless or reactive. They were dealing with someone whose power didn't depend on fists, knives, or intimidation. Their decision had already been made by their own underestimation. The moment Steven opened his mouth, he didn't give them an option. They had already lost the advantage. And that's the human truth behind the encounter. Sometimes one sentence can stop a mistake before it starts. Sometimes words, spoken with intention and clarity, carry far more weight than violence ever could. Sometimes control, calm, and awareness are stronger than any physical act. The two men slowly backed away, not out of fear in the cowardly sense, not out of panic, but out of awareness, out of recognition, out of respect for a power they had neither expected nor understood. Steven didn't celebrate. He didn't mock. He didn't chase them down. He simply stood there, breathing slowly, calm as before, letting the lesson sink in. The moment had passed, but the impact lingered. And in that silence, in that quiet triumph of control over chaos, there was a lesson for everyone watching. Power is not always physical. Strength is not always loud. And sometimes, the right words, delivered at the right moment, are enough to change the course of events, to prevent harm, and to save lives. Sometimes one sentence can save lives. Have words ever stopped you from making a mistake? Can you remember a moment where something someone said changed the outcome completely? The two men finally stepped back. Their shoulders slumped slightly, a subtle surrender not to violence but to awareness. They weren't running, they weren't screaming, they weren't panicking. They were simply stepping out of a situation they had misjudged, realizing the weight of their mistake in the quietest way possible. Steven Seagal didn't watch them leave. He didn't glare. He didn't follow. He didn't gloat or make a show of dominance. He simply observed for a moment, letting the lesson settle, not just for them, but for himself and anyone who might have been watching without even knowing it. He understood that real power doesn't need validation. Real power doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't need an audience to prove its worth. He turned and continued walking down the street. Each step measured, each breath steady, each movement deliberate. The sunlight reflected off the pavement. Ordinary people carried on with their day, completely unaware of what had just unfolded. To them, it might have seemed like nothing. Just a man walking past two other men, just a quiet street in daylight. But in reality, a moment of subtle authority, control, and human awareness had quietly changed the trajectory of a potentially dangerous encounter. There were no cameras rolling, no one recording the encounter, no viral clip to immortalize the incident online, and yet, the power of that moment didn't need validation. The impact wasn't in views or likes. It was in the shift of energy, the lesson silently imparted, and the reminder that strength often manifests quietly. The men who had tried to challenge him didn't leave humiliated. They left aware. They left conscious of their own choices. And perhaps, in that brief moment of realization, they understood that strength is not about the ability to dominate others physically. Strength is about knowing when to act, when to stand still, when to speak, and when to walk away. Steven walked on, blending into the crowd. His presence still carried weight, even if unnoticed. But that weight was not measured in intimidation or fear. It was measured in self-control, clarity, and the capacity to protect without aggression. That is the essence of true power, the ability to stop harm, prevent chaos, and assert control without causing damage. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The encounter had already ended, and its lesson had already been delivered. Sometimes the smallest actions speak the loudest. Sometimes the quietest words leave the strongest impression. Sometimes simply being present, calm, and aware is enough to change outcomes without raising a hand or voice. Strength isn't about hurting others. It's about stopping harm without becoming it. It's about recognizing danger before it happens, seeing fear behind the masks people wear, and choosing to act wisely rather than react impulsively. It's about standing in control of your own emotions, your own decisions, and your own presence, and letting that control ripple outward to influence situations without causing unnecessary harm. This moment serves as a reminder to all of us: power isn't in force. It's in the mind, in the heart, and in the ability to maintain composure when others lose theirs. True authority is quiet, deliberate, and confident. It doesn't demand attention, but it commands respect. It doesn't need applause, yet it leaves a lasting impact. The world often misunderstands strength as physical dominance or loud confrontation. But the reality is far more profound. Strength is patience. Strength is awareness. Strength is knowing when words are more effective than fists, when silence communicates more than noise, and when calmness diffuses what chaos cannot. Steven's walk down that ordinary street was a testament to this truth. No cameras, no audience, no accolades. Just a man walking aware, present, and in control. And for anyone paying attention, that silent act of power was more profound than any fight could ever be. Type respite if you believe real power is self-control. Comment where you're watching from. Share this if you believe violence is not the answer. This is the lesson of the encounter. The strongest people don't need to prove themselves with force. They prove themselves through awareness, presence, and the ability to protect without causing harm. And sometimes, walking away with calm confidence speaks louder than any fight ever could.